She's arguing with you again. Her voice is rising. She's listing every mistake you've made since 2019, and you feel that familiar urge to defend yourself, to explain why she's wrong, to prove your point with facts and logic. Your mouth opens to fire back with your carefully prepared counter-arguments, but then something stops you. You close your mouth. You look at her calmly. You say nothing. The change is immediate and unsettling. Her momentum falters. The rhythm of the argument breaks. She's no longer fighting against your resistance. She's performing for an audience that's no longer participating. The power dynamic has shifted in an instant, and she doesn't understand how. Welcome to the most powerful weapon in psychological warfare: strategic silence. Not the silence of weakness, not the quiet of submission, but the silence of absolute control. Today, I'm going to teach you how to use this weapon to gain psychological advantage over any woman without speaking a single word. Most men believe that winning arguments requires superior reasoning, better facts, or more convincing rhetoric. They think that verbal combat is won through verbal superiority, that the person with the best arguments, the quickest wit, or the most compelling evidence emerges victorious. This belief traps them in a game they cannot win because they're playing by rules that were designed to ensure their defeat. Every time you engage in verbal combat with a woman, you're entering her arena, playing her game, using her weapons. You're competing in a contest where the rules change constantly, and victory is determined not by logic but by emotional manipulation. Women excel at verbal warfare not because they're more logical, but because they understand that arguments aren't really about truth or facts. They're about power, control, and emotional dominance. While you're trying to win through reason, she's winning through psychological pressure, emotional manipulation, and strategic victimhood. The moment you open your mouth to defend yourself, you've already lost. You've signaled that her opinion matters enough to you that you feel compelled to change it. You've revealed that her criticism has power over you. You've demonstrated that you need her approval enough to fight for it. This desperate need to be understood, to be right, to have the last word is what keeps men trapped in endless cycles of fruitless arguments that drain their energy while strengthening her position. Every word you speak in your defense is evidence of your weakness. Every argument you make is proof of your insecurity. The only winning move in verbal combat is not to play. The only way to maintain power in an argument is to refuse to engage in one. Understanding how to use silence effectively requires understanding the psychological mechanisms that drive female argumentative behavior. Women don't argue to discover truth or reach understanding. They argue to establish dominance, control emotions, and extract validation. Female arguments operate on emotional rather than logical principles. The content of the disagreement is often irrelevant. What matters is the emotional dynamic being created. She's not trying to convince you that she's right. She's trying to make you feel wrong, guilty, or defensive. This emotional strategy works because most men assume that arguments are logical exchanges where the best reasoning wins. They respond to emotional attacks with logical defenses, not realizing that logic is completely irrelevant to the contest they're actually in. When she lists your failures, she's not providing evidence for a logical conclusion. She's creating emotional pressure designed to make you reactive and defensive. When she uses phrases like "you always" or "you never," she's not making factual claims. She's deploying psychological weapons designed to trigger guilt and compliance. The entire framework of female argumentation depends on your participation. Without your emotional reactions, defensive responses, and desperate attempts to prove yourself, her strategy collapses. She needs you to engage, react, and defend in order to maintain the power dynamic that serves her interests. This is why silence is so psychologically devastating to women who are used to controlling men through verbal manipulation. Your refusal to participate breaks the entire system and forces her to confront the emptiness of her strategy. When you respond to female criticism with silence, you create what psychologists call the mirror effect. Instead of providing the resistance she needs to maintain her emotional momentum, you become a blank surface that reflects her own words and energy back at her. This reflection forces her to confront the reality of her own behavior without the distraction of your defensive responses. She hears her own voice rising in anger. She notices her own emotional intensity. She becomes aware of how she sounds when she's not getting the reaction she expects. The mirror effect is psychologically uncomfortable, because it eliminates the external target for her emotions. Instead of directing her anger at your responses, she's forced to sit with her own emotional state. This discomfort often leads to escalation, as she tries harder to provoke the reaction she needs to justify her behaviour. But escalation in the face of silence only makes her appear more unreasonable, more out of control, and more emotionally unstable. The contrast between her emotional intensity and your calm silence becomes stark and undeniable. This psychological pressure is often unbearable for women who are accustomed to controlling interactions through emotional manipulation. They may increase their volume, make more dramatic accusations, or resort to increasingly desperate tactics to break your silence and regain the familiar dynamic. Your continued silence during this escalation demonstrates absolute emotional control and psychological strength. You're showing that her emotional state has no power over your internal state, that her attempts at manipulation cannot destabilize your center. Strategic silence transforms you from a reactive participant in someone else's drama into a gravitational center that others orbit around. Instead of being pulled into her emotional chaos, you become the stable point around which her chaos revolves. This transformation happens because silence communicates absolute confidence in your position. When you don't feel compelled to defend yourself, you signal that you're so secure in your worth that external criticism cannot touch you. This unshakable self-assurance is magnetizing. Gravitational presence means that instead of chasing approval, you become someone whose approval is sought. Instead of reacting to her emotions, you become someone whose emotional state influences hers. Instead of being controlled by her words, you become someone whose silence speaks louder than her voice. This presence is particularly powerful with women because they're accustomed to men who react predictably to their emotional manipulation. Your unpredictability disrupts their usual scripts and forces them to adjust their behavior to your energy, rather than expecting you to adjust to theirs. The gravitational effect extends beyond individual interactions to transform how you're perceived in social situations. Others begin to notice that you cannot be baited into arguments, that you remain calm under pressure, that you don't feel compelled to justify yourself to anyone. This reputation for unshakable composure becomes a source of respect and attraction because it signals psychological strength that most people lack. In a world of reactive, emotionally unstable people, the person who maintains calm presence stands out as naturally superior. Strategic silence isn't passive withdrawal. It's active psychological warfare using specific techniques that maximize your advantage while minimizing her ability to manipulate you. The first weapon is controlled non-response. This means maintaining calm presence while she escalates, neither engaging with her content nor reacting to her emotional intensity. You're not ignoring her. You're choosing not to participate in her drama. Controlled non-response requires killing the ego's desperate need to be right, to be understood, to have the last word. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect because it requires tolerating the discomfort of being misrepresented without correcting the record. The second weapon is observer mode. Instead of being pulled into her emotional state, you observe her behavior with the detached interest of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. You notice her tactics, her emotional patterns, her attempts at manipulation without being affected by them. Observer mode allows you to gather information about her psychological weaknesses, her trigger points, and her manipulation strategies. This information becomes valuable for future interactions because you understand her playbook even when she doesn't realize she has one. The third weapon is strategic timing. Silence isn't permanent. It's a tool that you deploy strategically. When you do choose to speak, your words carry enormous weight because they're rare and deliberately chosen. Strategic timing means waiting until the optimal moment to break your silence for maximum impact. This might be when she's exhausted from her emotional performance, when she's revealed something important about herself, or when a single well-placed observation can shift the entire dynamic. If you're beginning to understand how silence can be a more powerful tool than any argument you could make, and how this power comes from psychological principles rather than manipulation tactics, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. What I'm teaching today about strategic silence could transform every interaction you have with women. Not all silence is powerful. There's a crucial difference between the silence of mastery and the silence of submission, and confusing them will destroy rather than enhance your psychological position. Submission silence comes from fear, guilt, or the desire to avoid conflict. It's the silence of men who have been trained to suppress their own needs, opinions, and boundaries, to keep peace with women who punish authentic masculine expression. This submissive silence actually encourages further manipulation because it signals that you can be controlled through emotional pressure. Women interpret your failure to defend yourself as permission to continue or escalate their disrespectful behavior. Submission silence is characterized by internal tension, resentment, and the gradual erosion of your self-respect. You're not choosing silence. Silence is being imposed on you through psychological conditioning that has taught you to fear female disapproval more than you value your own dignity. This false silence often comes with physical signs of stress, tension in your shoulders, tightness in your chest, or a feeling of being energetically drained. You're suppressing your natural responses rather than choosing powerful non-response. The key distinction is choice and internal state. Mastery silence comes from a position of strength where you're choosing not to engage because engagement serves no useful purpose. Submission silence comes from a position of weakness where you're afraid to engage because of potential consequences. Mastery silence feels calm, centered, and powerful. Submission silence feels anxious, resentful, and depleting. Learning to distinguish between these internal states is crucial for developing authentic power rather than sophisticated weakness. When you master strategic silence, you become unpredictable in a world where most men are boringly reactive. This unpredictability gives you enormous psychological advantage because it prevents women from using their standard manipulation playbooks. Most women have learned to control men through predictable patterns, create emotional chaos, wait for defensive reaction, escalate until they get compliance or submission. This pattern works because most men are programmed to react emotionally to female emotional displays. Your refusal to follow the script disrupts her entire strategy. She doesn't know how to respond to a man who cannot be baited into arguments, who doesn't react to emotional manipulation, who remains calm in the face of her storms. This unpredictability forces her to develop new strategies for dealing with you, which puts you in the position of power because you're shaping the interaction rather than being shaped by it. She has to adjust to your energy rather than expecting you to adjust to hers. Unpredictability also makes you more interesting and attractive, because most women are bored by the predictable reactions they get from most men. A man who cannot be easily read or controlled represents a psychological challenge that many women find irresistible. The psychological principle at work is that humans are drawn to what they cannot easily obtain or control. Your unpredictability makes you a puzzle that women want to solve, a challenge they want to conquer, a mystery they want to unravel. Strategic silence establishes your authority more effectively than any verbal assertion of dominance ever could. Authority isn't claimed through words, it's demonstrated through behavior that commands respect without demanding it. When you remain calm while others are emotional, speak rarely but meaningfully, and refuse to be drawn into pointless conflicts, you naturally establish yourself as the adult in the room. Others begin to look to you for stability and leadership because you provide what they lack. This authority isn't based on aggression, intimidation, or dominance displays that women can counter with their own manipulation tactics. It's based on psychological strength that cannot be argued with or worn down through persistence. Authority through silence works because it demonstrates that you don't need anyone's permission to be who you are. Don't require anyone's validation to maintain your position, and don't feel compelled to justify your decisions to people who haven't earned the right to question them. This self-contained authority is particularly powerful with women because they are accustomed to men who seek their approval, try to impress them, or work hard to maintain their good opinion. A man who doesn't need their validation represents something rare and valuable. The establishment of this authority creates a psychological dynamic where women compete for your attention and approval rather than taking your attention for granted while withholding their approval. The power dynamic reverses naturally without effort or manipulation. While maintaining strategic silence, you gain access to enormous amounts of information about the women you're dealing with. People reveal themselves most completely when they're trying to provoke reactions from someone who won't provide them. During her attempts to break your silence, she'll reveal her psychological weaknesses, her manipulation strategies, her core insecurities, and her true character. This information is incredibly valuable for understanding who you're really dealing with beneath whatever persona she normally presents. You'll discover which buttons she tries to push, which tactics she relies on most heavily, how she behaves when her usual strategies don't work, and what happens when she can't control the interaction. This knowledge gives you tremendous advantage in all future dealings with her. The information gathering also extends to understanding her motivations, her fears, and her real agenda in the relationship. Women often reveal their true intentions when they are frustrated by their inability to manipulate you through standard methods. This intelligence gathering happens naturally without requiring interrogation or manipulation on your part. You simply remain silent and observe while she reveals everything you need to know about her character, her strategies, and her weaknesses. The psychological principle is that people cannot tolerate extended silence, and will fill it with increasingly revealing information about themselves. Your silence creates a vacuum that she feels compelled to fill, usually with honesty she wouldn't normally provide. Your ability to maintain silence in the face of emotional manipulation demonstrates superior emotional regulation that women find both attractive and intimidating. This demonstration of emotional strength sets you apart from the reactive men she's accustomed to controlling. Emotional regulation isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about choosing your responses rather than being controlled by your immediate emotional reactions. When you can remain calm while she's emotional, you're showing mastery over your internal state. This mastery is attractive because it signals psychological strength, emotional maturity, and the kind of stability that women seek in men but rarely find. Most men are emotionally reactive, which makes them predictable and easy to manipulate. Your emotional regulation also provides a calming influence on her emotional state. Women often escalate because they're feeding off male reactive energy. When you don't provide that energy, her emotional intensity naturally begins to decrease. The demonstration of emotional regulation also reveals the contrast between your maturity and her emotionality. This contrast often makes her aware of how she appears when she's being emotional, which can lead to self-consciousness and behavior modification. This emotional strength becomes a source of security for women who are attracted to strong men, but also a source of frustration for women who prefer to control men through emotional manipulation. Strategic silence serves as an invisible but impenetrable boundary that protects you from verbal abuse, emotional manipulation, and psychological invasion. These boundaries are more effective than verbal protest because they cannot be argued with or worn down. When you refuse to engage with disrespectful communication, you're establishing that such treatment is unacceptable without having to explain or justify your standards. Your silence communicates that you value yourself too much to participate in degrading interactions. This boundary enforcement is particularly effective because it's action-based rather than word-based. Women can argue with your words, but they cannot argue with your behavior. They can challenge your explanations, but they cannot challenge your refusal to participate. The boundaries established through silence are also self-enforcing. You don't need to monitor her behavior constantly or remind her of your standards. Your consistent non-participation in disrespectful interactions automatically maintains your boundaries. These invisible boundaries often cause women to modify their behavior without conscious awareness. They begin to speak to you more respectfully, because disrespectful communication receives no response and therefore serves no purpose. The psychological principle is that behavior that doesn't achieve its intended result tends to be abandoned in favor of behavior that does achieve results. Your silence makes respectful communication more rewarding than disrespectful communication. Paradoxically, your refusal to chase female approval through argument and explanation makes you more attractive to quality women who are looking for psychologically strong men. This attraction amplification happens because scarcity creates value. When you don't feel compelled to win every argument, explain every misunderstanding, or defend every criticism, you signal that you have an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mentality. This abundance is attractive because it's rare among men. Your silence also creates mystery and challenge that many women find irresistible. They want to understand what you're thinking, why you're not reacting, and how they can get through your psychological defenses. This challenge is particularly attractive to women who are used to easily manipulating men through emotional tactics. Your immunity to their standard strategies makes you a puzzle they want to solve and a challenge they want to conquer. The attraction amplification also works because silence demonstrates the kind of emotional self-control that women seek in men but rarely find. Most men are emotionally reactive, which makes them predictable and ultimately boring. Your strategic silence signals that you're different from other men, that you cannot be easily controlled or manipulated, and that you have psychological resources that most men lack. These qualities make you stand out in a sea of reactive, needy, approval-seeking men. The long-term effects of mastering strategic silence extend far beyond winning individual arguments or interactions. This skill transforms your entire psychological relationship with women and dramatically improves your position in all romantic and social dynamics. As you develop comfort with silence, you become less reactive to female emotional manipulation across all areas of your life. You stop feeling compelled to defend yourself against every criticism, explain every misunderstanding, or prove your worth to people who haven't earned the right to judge you. This psychological transformation creates a fundamental shift in how women perceive and interact with you. They begin to treat you with more respect because you've demonstrated that disrespectful treatment doesn't achieve their desired results. The confidence that comes from knowing you cannot be manipulated through verbal tactics spreads to other areas of your life. You become more selective about which conversations you participate in, more discerning about whose opinions matter to you, and more protective of your mental and emotional energy. This selectivity and discernment naturally filter out women who are primarily interested in drama, conflict, and emotional manipulation, while attracting women who appreciate psychological strength and emotional maturity. The long-term result is relationships that are more peaceful, more respectful, and more satisfying because they're built on mutual respect rather than manipulation and reactive dynamics. The fundamental truth about strategic silence is that it represents the difference between boys and men in their approach to female interactions. Boys feel compelled to respond to every challenge, defend every criticism, and prove themselves through words. Men understand that their worth doesn't require verbal defense. This silence isn't about disrespecting women or refusing to communicate. It's about respecting yourself enough to refuse participation in interactions that serve no constructive purpose. It's about understanding that some conversations are traps designed to waste your energy while serving someone else's agenda. The power of strategic silence comes from the psychological principle that behavior which receives no reinforcement tends to disappear. When you stop reinforcing disrespectful communication with your attention and emotional reactions, it naturally decreases. Mastering this skill requires developing comfort with being misunderstood, criticized, and even temporarily disliked by women who are used to controlling men through verbal manipulation. This discomfort is the price of psychological freedom. The men who develop this mastery discover that their relationships with women improve dramatically because they're no longer participating in the toxic dynamics that poison most male-female interactions. They attract better women while repelling women who are primarily interested in drama and control. Your silence becomes a form of leadership that guides interactions toward more constructive and respectful patterns. Instead of being pulled into someone else's chaos, you become the calm center that others adjust to. True power in relationships doesn't come from having the last word, winning every argument, or proving that you're right. It comes from being so secure in your worth that you don't need external validation to maintain your sense of self. If this guide to strategic silence has shown you how psychological strength can be more powerful than any argument you could make, subscribe to this channel for more insights into developing unshakable masculine confidence. Hit that notification bell because understanding these principles could transform every interaction you have with women. Share this video with any man who's tired of being drawn into pointless arguments and wants to understand that true power lies not in what you say, but in what you don't need to say. The difference between men who get respected and men who get manipulated is often the difference between those who know when to speak and those who know when silence speaks louder.